Hi, welcome back to Get Started with IBM Streams. In this video, I'll be walking you through how to complete Lab 4, Developing Modular Applications. Right now, our application expects IDs with first characters C followed by 3 characters, for example C101. Now we need an operator that can identify when IDs are not of this format and store it for later auditing. Technically, the filter operator can do this, but let's use a different one. Let's drag the split operator located under spl.utility, and let's drag it onto our throttled stream. Now let's reorganize our graph again. Now let's drag an output port onto our split operator. For this lab, we only need 2 output ports, but the split operator can actually have more than that. Now let's add an extra file sync to write our non-formatted tuples to an errors file. So let's type in file sync and drag it onto our main composite. Let's reorganize. Now let's connect the file sync to our split operator and let's give it a schema of location type and reorganize again. Now let's do a little renaming. Rename the first output stream to expected and the second one to unexpected. So let's go to properties and rename it. While we typically blank out the alias of this previous operator, in this case we have 2 output streams, which will make our split operator inherit the first one. And that's a bit misleading, so what we really want is to name this ID checker, and it checks whether the incoming IDs are in an expected format or in an unexpected format. So let's do that. Let's also rename our new file sync to error writer. Lastly, let's edit the parameters for our 2 new operators. Let's start with the split operator. In the parameter section, let's add an index parameter. When tuples flow into this operator, it evaluates this index value, which usually depends on the incoming tuple in some way. Whatever index value it evaluates to is the port the tuple gets forwarded to. That might sound a little confusing, but you'll understand once you look at the value we set this to. So let's set it to this substring. We pass it in our ID from the incoming tuples, 0, 1, and make that equal to C, capital C in quotes. Now type in the ampersand sign twice, followed by length, and let's pass it in ID. Let's make that equal to 4. And now question mark. 0L, L stands for long integer, and that's just the format. And then colon 1L. So let me explain what this syntax means. Substring is a function that extracts a part of a whole string. 0 is the position where you want to start cutting at, and 1 is the amount of characters from the original start position that you want to keep. Essentially, this function right here extracts the first character of incoming tuple IDs, and according to our format, that character should be equal to C. Additionally, the length of the ID should be equal to 4. And so if this statement here evaluates to true, then our index is equal to 0. So we output to port 0, and that's the port for our expected data stream. Now, if this statement evaluates to false, then it outputs to port 1, and that's the output port for our unexpected data stream. Hopefully that all made sense. The last thing we need to do is edit the parameters for our arrow writer. In its parameter section, let's add 3 new parameters. Let's add flush, format, and quote strings. For our file parameter, let's output it to a file called error.observations. And I forgot the quotes. For the flush, let's give it a value of 2u. The do-it-yourself section should explain why we need to flush for this particular file sync, but not for the others. For format, let's give it a value of CSV, and quote strings should be false. Now let's save our application. There should be no errors, so let's go ahead and launch it. The error.observations file should have been created for us in our resources/data directory. You may need to right-click on data and select refresh to actually see these files. So now let's open our error.observations, and it might ask you to refresh this file. So let's do that. And in here, you should see that our app picked up 2 unexpected IDs, and they should be bad1 and C000 bad. So if you get that, your app is working correctly. So now let's close that. Now let's take a look at 2 new operators called import and export. These operators work on a publish and subscribe basis. You'll understand what this means after we add and configure these operators. So let's start by first dragging a new composite onto our graph. Let's look for composite. And make sure you drag it outside of your original composite. Now let's select our files, our observations, and our throttled operators by holding Control while selecting them, and let's cut them using Control X. It should disappear from our My Main composite. Now select our new composite and paste them into there with Control V. You should get this. Now let's rename our new composite by right-clicking on it and editing. And let's name it File Ingest instead. Now let's close this dialog box. Now we have 2 composites, but they need to communicate somehow. So let's drag the export operator onto our file ingest, and let's drag the import operator onto our My Main composite. And let's reorganize this. Now let's rename our export to file exporter. And let's give it some properties in its parameters. So let's go to param, add properties, and for its value, let's give it category is equal to vehicle positions, and another property of feed being equal to sample file, and click enter. Our export operator exports tuples in a stream with these properties, and these property keys and values are completely arbitrary. Next, we're going to configure our import operator to specifically look for streams of these properties and import them. But before that, let's first connect our throttle operator to our file exporter. And let's connect our import operator to our ID checker. Let's reorganize. Now let's rename our import operator to file importer. Okay, now let's subscribe our file importer to our file exporter. And we can do that by going into its parameters and giving its subscription a value of category equals vehicle positions and hit enter. Lastly, let's give the output stream a schema of location type, and let's save. Remember, only one key value pair needs to match in order for our file importer to subscribe to the stream. So now that there are no errors, let's go ahead and launch both these composites. For the file ingest, we're first going to need to go to New, Build Configuration, and click OK. Now that that's done, let's launch both these applications. If we go to our instance graph, it should look like this. The exporter should be connected to the importer. Now don't cancel these jobs, as we'll be adding a third application that works in conjunction with these two. This video is getting a bit long though, so I'll be taking up the rest of this lab in another video. See you there.